Good morning.
Good morning.
As was shared before, my name is Bill. Pronouns are he, him, and it's a joy to be with you this morning. I was thinking I'm going to come from a different tradition, a United Methodist tradition. We have a lot of links, but my tradition's a little different. And I wasn't sure about the length that you're used to in sermons and compared to what I'm used to, but I found out this morning that many of you can't get home till 2:30, so I'm not worried about it anymore. I think we're all good. I want to focus our attention on the second reading that you heard today from 1 Corinthians. I want to share with you that oftentimes when I read Scripture, I find myself kind of shaking my head and saying, what in the world does this have to do with us? It doesn't seem to be relevant to anything in our lives, our culture. So what's the point? Why is this here? And more, honestly, to tell you the truth, my response to that is it doesn't. It really doesn't have much to do with us today. And some of the things that we read really just need to be relegated to history and let go of. They represent some ancient code or ethic that really doesn't have a place in our world today. We need to be honest about that, I think. But other times, when we delve a little deeper into a particular text that seems weird or strange or out of place for our world, we discover, I think, that maybe there is something to take away from this writing and this situation from a first century context that maybe reveals quite an important principle for us today. And I think the passage that we read here from Corinthians is one of those, at least for me. So I invite us to kind of explore that together this morning and see if that's not the case. Clearly in this text, like in several places in Paul's letters, Paul is actually responding to a question that was given to him in a previous letter written to him by the church at Corinth. In this case, it's about eating food or eating meat that's been sacrificed to idols. Let me just refresh our memory and go over it again real quickly. Therefore, he says, as to eating food offered to idols. We know that an idol has no real existence and that there is no God but one. However, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We're no worse off if we eat, or if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block for the weak. So that's Paul addressing clearly a significant question for that Corinthian context. But the question we have is, what's that got to do with us? I mean, as far as I know, right? You can let me know if I'm wrong. As far as I know, there aren't any idol temples set up in Benzie County where folks are bringing their steaks to offer to a particular idol. I don't think that's going on. So, what does this text have to do with us, right? But again, while the specifics of eating meat sacrificed to idols isn't an issue for us today, I think that maybe there is a principle here. In fact, I would go so far to say that the principle represented here is actually an incredibly vital principle to anyone who is seeking to follow Jesus. And in order to get to that principle, we need to begin to look at the context in Corinth first. So Corinth was a cosmopolitan city. It was a seaport. It was a place where people were coming and going all the time. It was a shipping port, and again, a very busy place. And because of that, it was also a center for lots of religious activity. And most of that activity was affiliated in some way or another with a particular god or a particular idol, and there were many. And celebrations were held, worship was held, that often involved the sacrifice of animals to those idols. But here's the thing. Most of the meat that was sacrificed, that wasn't consumed, because more of it was offered than was able to be consumed at the religious event, made its way into the market and for general sale to the public. And the public purchased their food, and it was common practice. And there was really no way to tell whether meat that you bought in the market had been sacrificed to an idol somewhere in its history or not. So, along with those who actually participated in the worship experience were those who just bought meat in the market and were worried that even doing that was linking them to their former practice. Now, for Paul, clearly these gods were no threat to faith. And so eating that meat that you purchased for the weekend that may have been sacrificed was no big deal for him. But again, to some in the Corinthian church who had become followers of Christ out of those former religious practices of idol worship, as it were, for some of them, it was a significant deal. And for them, eating meat was a challenge. It reflected something significant to them because of where they'd come from, what their experience had been. So in the face of this reality, Paul says two things. First, he says that again, idols are nothing. They're not, from a faith perspective, a challenge or a threat. They're not gods, so Christ's followers need not worry about eating meat that was purchased in the market, even if it had been, even had a history related to this idol worship. He suggests freedom that points for him to spiritual maturity. And he says those who are concerned about eating meat, those who want to put restrictions on it, and don't feel free in Christ to move forward in this without fear of breaking some kind of rule, he identifies those folks as weak. Now, I point that out because often in our culture today, we tend to see those who don't do things, those who follow the most restrictive religious rules, those who have all kinds of fences around their behavior and seek often in some very judgmental ways to put those same fences around the behavior of others. Those who have a long list of thou shalt nots as a rather central part of their faith. Oftentimes, in many of our church cultures, these folks are seen as the strong ones, as the most mature ones, the spiritual, biblical Christians. And I just find it an interesting observation. You can do with it what you want. That Paul identifies and indicates here that the opposite is true. The most mature, as he identifies them, are those who are free from this legalistic understanding of faith. Again, I'll invite you to do with that what you will, but I find it interesting. Secondly, he says on the other side, that just because you have freedom doesn't mean you can just ignore the rest of the world. And I want to invite us to broaden this concept as we look at it this morning. We're not just free to do whatever we want, even if from our perspective there's no problem. Paul in fact says that he is so committed to not messing somebody up, to not hurt somebody else, living in a different reality, in a different perspective. He is so committed to that he would choose, even though he knows idols are nothing and he's free to eat whatever out of the market or wherever, he says, I'm not going to do it. It's going to harm somebody else. And what's the principle there? Well, I dare say it's the simplest and yet the most central of principles. Love. Love for one another. Care for one another. Doing our best to help our fellow human beings be valued and feel understood. This is a responsibility, Paul says, we have then towards one another. We don't have the right to take our knowledge and just ignore the struggle or the situation of another because it doesn't happen to affect us. We have a responsibility to value and care for one another. And often, at least in my life and as I look around the world, that means that we are called to pay attention to the struggles of others. And make sure that we don't celebrate our freedom, as Paul says, I would interject another word, our privilege, in ways that cause problems for other folks. We don't just say, well, that's ridiculous. Yeah, get over it. Basically, you need to be like me. No. We do our best to understand and even advocate. Now, sometimes, as Paul indicates, that's just a matter of avoiding the exercise of our freedom. And that's not too hard. I think all of us have done that in times. If we have friends who we know have problems with alcohol, we don't invite them out to the bar. We don't offer them drinks in our home, even though we're fine with that and don't have a problem with alcohol ourselves. But sometimes it means going further. Sometimes it means listening to their perspective in respectful ways. Again, not just assuming that everyone thinks like we do. It would be a better world if everyone thought like we do, right? We understand that. But we move beyond that and realize that everybody doesn't need to be like us. So let me see if I can invite us to take a look at this broader second issue of Paul's and see how it might play itself out today. We hear folks today talk about political correctness, and I guess the more modern term these days is wokeness. And most of the time when these words are used, the term is used in a pretty derogatory way, right? Someone uses this phrase and eyes roll, and groans are audibly heard. Sometimes what's called political correctness or wokeness is seen as an overreach, even almost detrimental, or at least bothersome. Why does everybody have to be so sensitive? Is the question that often gets asked when these words are invoked or their principles requested. Friends, well, I'm not sure what everybody means when they use either of these terms. For me, they represent simply an awareness and a willingness to become more aware through education. And more than that, simply common respect. And let me give you some real examples about what I'm talking about. In 2019, the annual conference in my denomination, we have an annual gathering, I'm sure you guys do too somewhere, and about 2,000 United Methodist clergy and lay people descend upon a site, and we gather to for us to do pastoral appointments, pass budgets and legislation, and ordain clergy. All of that happens at our annual conference. And in 2019, we had the additional task of electing delegates to the 2020 General Conference, which happens every 4 years. And you're getting a wonderful education in Methodist polity today. In any case, we elect folks who go to that event in 2020. In 2020, we didn't actually have it because of COVID, and we're still trying to have it. I think we're going to make it in 2024. But anyway, we elect delegates to that event that happens every 4 years. And because of that, different, and I don't know a better way to say it, different classifications, different folks who have different roles have different colored name tags, because not everybody can vote for everything that's going to happen in the annual conference that year. And in 2019, those with the most power, full members of the annual conference, full clergy, deacons and elders, were given white name tags. So that's what we had in our lanyards for that year. And the first day of the annual conference, an African-American member of our conference came to the microphone and respectfully asked that the next time we had occasion to be voting and having different classifications of folks voting, he asked that those with the most power, the most voting rights, might have a different name tag color other than white. He made the request, and you could hear in the room audible groans. What a ridiculous request was the sentiment shared by those groans, at least as I perceive. But while I confess, as a privileged white full clergy member, I never saw the power link that my fellow African-American member experienced as I placed my white name tag into my lanyard at the beginning of the conference. Mostly because I have the privilege every day not to have to think about things like that. As I listen to him speak, I see he's right. And regardless of any of that, regardless of whether he's right or not, for him, that symbol was painful. So I hope and trust that the next time we have the opportunity to vote and delineate those who have the most power, we do it with different colored name tags. How hard is that? It's a simple thing, but it really makes a difference. Oh, I know that for many that's just ridiculous. It's over the top. It's silliness. I would simply invite us to understand perhaps it's just respect. I'm a graduate of Eastern Michigan University, and when I was there, our sports mascot was the Huron, a Native American tribe in the area. And in the 1990s, there was a protest against the image used to promote that team's mascot. Native people found it offensive and were voicing that concern. Ultimately, the school's Board of Regents officially changed the team's logo to the Eagles, We don't play any better. We never have played any good. But now we are the Eagles. Now some alumni fought that tooth and nail. Some pointed to Native Americans who stated that they themselves didn't see the Huron as offensive. But in fact, there was a significant group of Native folks who did. And it baffles me why we would not do something as simple as changing a name tag color or changing a mascot when we are touching something as deep as the pain African Americans and Native Americans have experienced from the absolutely awful and shameful treatment that they received throughout history. If responding to this harm by changing the color of a name tag or a mascot can bring some level of healing and understanding that their folks are being heard and respected, how in the world could we say no? No, it has to be my way. That's ridiculous. And brush it off and give one more slap, one more pain. To tell people that their offense is wrong somehow because I don't feel it or think it's somehow worthy of my attention or it's simply over the top doesn't seem very well. And I know it isn't always that clear. It isn't always that binary, this or that, as I'm making it this morning, but you know what I mean. And you know what? Sometimes it is just that clear. And we do offer this respect a lot of times. In the last church I served in Pimpwater, we had a woman whose name was Suzanne. And you would know that if you ever called her Susan. She would let you know very quickly that that was not her name. And so, obviously, we called her Suzanne. That was her name. And that's what she preferred, and she was very particular about it. Most of us would never say, come on. I can't be expected to remember that every time. There's 3 other Susans in this congregation, and you just ought to get in line. Susan is so much easier. Well, of course not. We want to respect Suzanne. So we use her name properly. And this reality, I believe, is particularly important today to remember as we seek to honor and respect members of the LGBTQIA plus community. As we seek to honor, as your congregation is doing in some wonderful ways, thank you for that, these members of our human family who've experienced so much pain over the years. Paul told the Corinthians to pay attention to the needs of those around them. Even when it isn't your way of thinking, even when it isn't anything that really affects you, even when it seems weird or strange or you don't understand and haven't done the research yet, listen to one another and respect one another. So friends, whatever our next challenge might be, it tempts us to roll our eyes and brush aside the needs and the perspectives of another. I hope we choose instead to follow the directive of Paul and I dare say, the pattern of Jesus, and approach every new challenge with the openness of love, sensitivity, and respect. May it be so.